This is not about the European Union. It is about how a country can be weakened without a single shot being fired. No tanks. No declaration of war. Instead, the lights go out. Cables are cut. Digital systems are disrupted. This kind of attack does not seize territory. It makes a state stop functioning. And Europe has become the place where this new model of conflict is being tested. For decades, security systems were built for one kind of threat: a direct military invasion. Tanks, troops, and missiles. The logic was simple. If the cost of war is high enough, the enemy will back down. But today's conflicts no longer work that way. The most likely threat is no longer an open war between NATO and Russia. It is gradual pressure on Europe's critical infrastructure: undersea cables, power grids, transportation networks, digital systems. These attacks do not create spectacular destruction, but they are enough to disrupt daily life and generate political and economic uncertainty. This is what hybrid conflict looks like: operating below the threshold of war, using ambiguity as a weapon, and testing how far alliances are willing to respond. Russia is explicitly identified as an actor that has tested cables, pipelines, and strategic networks across Europe. But the core issue is not only Russia. The deeper question is whether the transatlantic system still has the credibility to deter this kind of pressure. For more than 70 years, European security has rested on one assumption: that the United States would act if a major threat emerged. Deterrence is not just about weapons. It is about belief. The belief that those weapons will actually be used. Once doubt appears, the space to test limits expands. And that testing is already happening. The war in Ukraine remains the center of the threat landscape. But the highest risk is not a direct NATO or Russia war. The greater risk is something more subtle: an outcome that leaves permanent gains for the aggressor. Why does this matter systemically? Because if aggression produces rewards, the unwritten rule against changing borders by force begins to collapse. It sets a precedent that military and hybrid pressure can reshape strategic reality. In that scenario, Europe inherits unstable borders, while Russia gains time to consolidate its position. Beyond Ukraine, military action against neighboring non-allied states is considered more likely than a direct confrontation with NATO. The logic is simple: softer targets, greater ambiguity, lower political cost. This is not sudden escalation. It is gradual expansion. At the same time, the risk of conflict around Taiwan is rising. Why does Taiwan matter to Europe? Because the global economy is deeply interconnected. Disruption around Taiwan would hit semiconductor supply chains and global trade. Europe may not be a central actor there, but it would still feel the impact, industrially and financially. This is the new dimension of global power: interdependence as vulnerability. Taken together, this is not one great war in the making, but a long-term contest. Pressure from Russia, uncertainty over American commitment, potential crises in the Indo-Pacific, and fragile modern infrastructure. All of this creates a world where power is constantly being tested without crossing into open war. In such an environment, who benefits? Actors comfortable operating in the gray zone. Actors skilled in gradual erosion. Actors who exploit doubt inside alliances. And who loses? Alliances that require political consensus to act. Highly connected states with weak protection. Systems built on the assumption of permanent stability. Europe now faces a structural choice. If it strengthens its defenses, builds redundancy into critical infrastructure, reduces external dependence, and actively shapes Ukraine's future, it moves toward becoming a strategic actor. If it does not, it remains an arena where Russia tests limits, an arena affected by Indo-Pacific crises, an arena dependent on an American commitment. That is increasingly debated at home. For the United States, the implications are also profound. A weak Europe raises long-term costs, but sustaining full commitment also ties down resources and strategic focus. This is the systemic shift. The world is not moving toward one decisive global war. It is entering an era of great power competition that is fragmented, interconnected, and fought across multiple domains at once. Europe sits at the center of it, not because it is the only battlefield, but because it has become a junction between Russia, America, and wider global dynamics. And if deterrence fails, it may not fail with an explosion. It fails when an opponent concludes that the risk of pushing is lower than the risk of backing down. When that conclusion spreads, the balance of power shifts. Without a single declaration of war,